We wanted to talk about some of the common form letters that veterans will see throughout the course of a disability claim. Though there is a lot of boilerplate, we really want to stress the importance of actually reading the letters.
Be sure and read the actual letter from the VA. But more important, please understand that any letter that you get from the VA, you should assume needs a response from you. Don't just ignore their letters, no matter how stupid the particular letter may be given the circumstances of your case. Keep in mind that the VA is a giant bureaucracy. It has these forms that it uses to communicate with people.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA, your guide to unlocking your VA disability benefits. If you're a veteran who is trying to get disability benefits from the VA, subscribe to our podcast for the latest developments in VA disability. So, welcome. I'm Francis Jackson. This is Kristian Terrison. We're from Jackson and MacNichol, a law firm that specializes in getting justice for veterans on their disability claims. So, who is this podcast for? Well, obviously it's for veterans, but it's more than that. It's for friends of veterans, relatives of veterans, anybody who wants to support our veterans. And today, we're going to be talking about form letters that you may get from the VA. So without further ado.
All right. So as you said, the topic is form letters, sort of getting through the boilerplate to what they really mean. So we wanted to talk about some of the common form letters that veterans will see throughout the course of a disability claim. But before we get too far into that, though there is a lot of boilerplate, we really want to stress the importance of actually reading the letters. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Jack?
Sure. Two things. First, be sure and read the actual letter from the VA. But more important, please understand that any letter that you get from the VA, you should assume needs a response from you. Don't just ignore their letters, no matter how stupid the particular letter may be given the circumstances of your case. Keep in mind that the VA is a giant bureaucracy. It has these forms that it uses to communicate with people. And VA, for better or worse, has a lot of new employees. Sometimes they don't pick the right form letter. They try to adjust a letter to the circumstances of your case when those circumstances just are not within the scope the letter was intended for, and it won't make much sense. But communicate back to them. Keep a dialogue going if they start a dialogue with you with a form.
Definitely. And as Jack was saying, the VA is a giant bureaucracy, and they're a giant old bureaucracy. So, we have text messaging, email, all these wonderful new means of communication. But, the primary form of communication you're getting from the VA, and the one that really counts when the chips are down, is good old-fashioned paper letters. And that's kind of a two-way street as well, wouldn't you say?
It is.
So if you have something that, you want the VA to know, and you want to be able to show and prove that you told them, do it in writing, keep a copy for yourself, send it certified mail and hold on to the certificate. Those are all good ways to, hold their feet to the fire when sending particularly important communications off to the VA. Another thing that goes hand in glove with that is keeping your address with the VA up to date. Can you talk a little about that, Jack?
Sure. One of the most frustrating things that can happen in your VA case is you move and the VA can't find you, starts sending the letters to the wrong place, they come back to the VA, and they end up not proceeding with your case because they've lost track of you. Don't let that happen. Don't rely on the change of address form from the post office. Keep in mind that VA cases move very slowly. The change of address form is only good for 6 months. That's all. So make sure that you send the VA at least once, and preferably 2 or 3 times, something in writing giving your new address, and if your phone number changes, of course, change that with them as well. But make sure that they can find you at your current address. It sounds ridiculously basic, but trust me, veterans every day get into problems with the VA because the VA is not using their current address.
And when the VA makes mistakes with mailing things, and you can prove it, you can argue it, but it'll still add incredible delays onto any claim. So the best practice is to just keep them up to date. And as Jack said, send them notice of any new address a couple of times just to be on the safe side. It'll be worth the postage in the long run. So one of the first sort of form letters we wanted to talk about is, to begin at the beginning, the notification that they've received an intent to file. So can
Sure.
you talk a little bit about that one?
Absolutely. An intent to file is a really important form. What that does, it's part of the VA's 099 series, and what it does is it's a placeholder. So, for example, say that you decide today that you need to make a claim to the VA for a problem you've started having with your left knee that goes back to an injury to your left knee in service. So if you send in the intent to file form, that acts like a marker starting the time running on your claim. So even if you find it too challenging to complete the entire VA claim form applying for benefits for your left knee, as long as you send in the intent to file, that will serve as the placeholder, and you then have up to a calendar year, 12 months, to submit the actual claim without losing any potential benefits. What the notice of intent to file does is it tells the VA that's the date to start your claim going forward. And so long as you file the actual claim with the VA within 12 months of the date of the notice of intent to file, when they finally get around to granting your claim, your benefits will go back to the first day of the first month after the date you file the notice of intent to file. So we're recording this on the 24th. So if you got the form in by the end of this month, and a year from now the VA finally gets around to granting your benefits, those benefits would go back to the first of next month, because that's the first day of the first full month after you filed the notice of intent. Whereas if you waited until you completed the claims form, and that was 3 months from now, then the VA would only go back to the date of that claim form. So potentially you would lose 3 months of benefits.
All right. Next on our list, I have the development letter, at least that as it's called in the VA's own internal documents. Around here we call it the more info needed letter. Care to expound on that one?
Sure. In almost every case, the VA will send a letter that says we need more information. And you ignore that letter to your peril, trust me. What the VA is doing with those letters is explaining that in their view, they don't have enough information about one or more topics. It can be a variety of different things, but there's something that they think they don't have enough information about in order to decide your case. So if you want to get your case decided, what you need to do is sit down, write out a response to the VA saying, here's the information you want, and provide the information with the form. Send it all to the VA together. We always encourage people to send it by certified mail or to hand carry it to the VA to make sure that they actually get it and it's all together. VA has a terrible habit in their mailing process, their incoming mail process, of separating things out. And if you've sent a response to the letter and 5 documents that you want the VA to look at as giving the information they sought in that letter, you want that stuff to stay together for the adjudicator to look at. So send it together, take it in together, whatever it is you need to do, but get it to the VA in response to the letter and try to make the time frame they set in the letter. Typically, these letters will have a timeline. They want a response within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is. Try to make sure you hit the timeline if possible. If you can't hit the timeline, submit the evidence anyway. You will be better off than if you don't submit it, even if you submit it late. So always respond in writing, and send them whatever evidence that they're asking for.
All right. Next on the list is another one we see a lot of. It's the notice of an incomplete form.
Okay. The VA has an unusual rule. Most federal agencies don't have anything similar, but the VA has this rule that says if you send them something and they consider it to be incomplete, number one, they have to notify you. Number two, they have to give you a period of time to submit whatever it is they've said is missing. So if they send you a notice of an incomplete form, they will typically tell you what they think is missing. They won't always be correct, but it's a place to start at least. Look to see what they say. And also look at the form and whatever you sent with it. So if there's something else that's missing, you take note of that. But respond to the letter. Say, you've said this information is missing. Here is the information you've said is missing. And feel free to submit anything else that you think is supportive or helpful on that point, in addition to what they've said is missing. And once again, I encourage you to send it by certified mail. It just makes it easy later on to demonstrate that you really did respond and they really did get it, and it's not your fault that they've managed to put it in somebody else's file or to lose it in the pile of paper on the BSO's desk or whatever happened to it. So the key thing, though, is respond. And even if you're willing to take a chance that they won't be able to find it later and not send it certified, at least send it. Preferably certified, but at least send it.
All right. Now, this next one is a bit of a Swiss Army knife when it comes to form letters, because it's the notice of decision. And that can accompany the most momentous decision they might make in your case, or the most minuscule. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The VA typically calls these rating decisions. And in the decision, they are supposed to respond to each of the claims that you submitted. If it was one claim, that's easy. If it was a dozen claims, it's a little harder, but they're supposed to respond to all of them. And typically, the rating decision will cover everything, although once in a while you will see a rating decision that says, and rating is deferred on, and it could be, your left little toe, your right shoulder, your mental health claim, whatever it is. But the purpose of that decision is to tell you where you stand on your claim, what VA has decided about the claim, whether they're going to grant it or they're going to deny it, or whether they've deferred it and they're going to do some more development. But regardless of what it says, it's a critically important document because it will tell you where you stand and what you need to do next. If the decision says that service connection for your claim is granted, then you move on to the second step, which is the rating part. Typically, the decision will go on to say, if a connection is granted, that it is now rated, and it will be rated at 0%, 10%, 20%, some higher number. If the VA gives you a 0% rating, that's what's called a non-compensable rating, meaning, yes, you've been service-connected, but they're not convinced that you have any significant symptoms, and they're not going to pay you any benefits, disability benefits. So what you have to do if you get one of those is then you have to go back to the VA and show them evidence about the severity of your claim. Now, as long as they rate it at 10% or higher, they're going to start paying you some modest amount each month for your claim. As the rating percentage gets higher, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever it is percent, the amount of money gets higher. It is not an arithmetic progression. It is a geometric progression. The 10% rating gets you less than $200 a month, but a 100% rating gets you over $3,000 a month. And that doesn't proceed in a straight line. It really is it's a sharp curve. So you need to look at what they say in the rating decision. If they grant, then you need to look at the percentage. But if they deny one or more claims, then it's time for you to decide how you're going to respond to that. You can file a higher level review, which will result in a more experienced rater at the same office looking at the case. We don't encourage that a lot because usually the same office, even with a more experienced rater, looking at the same evidence, will come to the same result. So not particularly useful, and you've burned up several months. But what is often useful at that level is what's called a supplemental claim. That's a separate form that you can file with the VA. And the important part about a supplemental claim, and the reason it's different than higher level review, is the supplemental claim allows you to submit new evidence. On higher level review, you're stuck with whatever the VA already looked at. But on a supplemental claim, you can submit new evidence to help them to understand either why your condition should be service-connected or why it's more severe than they originally thought, whichever issue you're looking at, or both. But the important part is to respond to the rating decision. You have a year, which is a significant period of time, and as long as you respond within a year, whatever they do on their response, if they ultimately grant it, will go back to the date of your original claim, or your notice of intent to file if you filed a notice of intent earlier. So pay attention to the rating decision, look at what they grant, look at what they deny, and again, it is possible you will have one of those rare notations where they defer a claim. If that happens, it just means you're going to get a separate rating decision that deals with the deferred claim, and typically that'll come out within 6 months or a year. If they defer a claim and you haven't heard anything within a calendar year, you should make sure you follow up aggressively with the VA and say, gee, you told me this was deferred, you haven't acted on it, it's been quite a while, let's get this done. So the important part, though, is look at what they did and figure out your response.
All right. And there are a couple more that I wanted to get through before we're out of time for today, but these pertain to if you appeal your case up to the Board of Veterans Appeals, the BVA, the placed on the docket letter, if you could.
Sure. The placed on the docket letter just really is self-explanatory. All it means is that the VA has gotten through its internal process of moving your case from the regional office where it was rated to the Board of Veterans Appeals. Your case has been listed on the docket for the Board of Veterans Appeals, and you are now in line for a board decision, whether it's a decision based on direct review or based on submission of new evidence or one where you've requested a hearing. Regardless of which of those three lanes you picked, the placed on the docket letter is simply telling you, hey, we got your appeal, we have now processed it internally, and we've set it in line on the docket, which means you will slowly progress toward actually getting action on your claim and ultimately a decision by the board.
All right. Another one that's relatively self-explanatory, the hearing notice.
When you appeal a case from the regional office to the Board of Veterans Appeals, there are three different processes, or they call them lanes, that you can pick. One is the direct review lane, one is the evidence docket lane, and one is the hearing docket lane. So the way these work, the evidence review lane is just what it sounds like. The board takes the evidence that's already in the file, looks at it, and makes a new decision. Not surprisingly, most of those are denied. You know, if someone from the VA already looked at all the evidence and said, no, that doesn't prove the claim, having a more sophisticated set of people look at it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a different result. It means you're going to get a harder look at it, and it's possible you'll get a different result, but that's pretty rare. Mostly, if they looked at it and denied it at the regional office, they're going to look at it and deny it at the board. So we don't typically encourage people to file direct review. If the regional office decision was really, really confused or overlooked a major fact or misunderstood the law, it's possible direct review will be an opportunity to fix it, and it's a little faster than some of the other approaches theoretically, but we don't encourage it as a general rule. It's typically not helpful. So second way to go is the evidence docket. What the evidence docket does is it allows you the opportunity to submit new evidence to the board that was not considered by the regional office. And typically what you would do is you would file the Form 10182 Notice of Disagreement with the rating decision, and you would submit your new evidence. You have up to 90 days, and in some cases, VA will send you a letter saying that they have kind of arbitrarily started the 90-day period a little later than when you actually filed. That's a good thing. Don't complain. If your evidence gets submitted a little late under those circumstances, you may still be in time. But the short version is there's a 90-day window. The evidence has to be within that 90-day window. And one thing that's really important for you to know is that if something has changed, something's happened, if there have been other decisions in the case that are favorable to you that have occurred between the time of the rating decision and the time the board looks at the evidence in your case, the board will not consider any of that information. If you want the board to consider anything at all that happened after the date of the board decision, of the regional office decision, you must resend that information to the board. So say, for example, you get a rating decision on April 1st. On April 16th, a different rating decision is issued, which now puts you in a position where you might be eligible for an increased benefit. Say, for example, that the new rating decision information combined with the old rating information puts you at 70% with at least one condition rated at 40%. That would potentially make you eligible for payment at the 100% rate if you can convince the board that you're totally disabled and entitled to what's called TDIU. But the board won't look at that intervening decision on its own. You have to resubmit it. So it's really important in these evidence submission cases to make sure that if something that you think is useful to you has happened in the case after the rating decision, you need to include it and send it to the board within your 90-day window. Finally, the third option at the board is proceeding with a board hearing. The nice thing about the board hearing is it gives you the longest window for new evidence. The entire period that your case is waiting for hearing by the board, multiple pieces of important medical information can come along. Your job is to collect those up and submit them to the board within a 90-day window that starts on the day of your hearing and ends 90 days later. And as I mentioned earlier, anything favorable that comes into the file after the rating decision and before the board hearing, the board cannot consider, as a matter of law, they can't consider it. So your job is to collect up anything that falls in that category, collect up the new evidence that you want to present, put that all together, and get it to the board within the 90-day window from the date of your hearing up to 90 days thereafter.
Couple of last ones before we have to finish up.
Sure.
The letter issued an error notice, which is, a frequent flyer as well.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, the VA is large, it's bureaucratic. They have some new employees who don't always get it exactly right. And so one letter that we see with surprising frequency is a letter that says, we wrote to you previously, and they'll give you the date, and said X, whatever X was. And by the way, now we're telling you that we were wrong and you can ignore that letter. It's incredibly frustrating when you get these things, but the good news is it means that they figured out that they made a mistake, and if you've already sent in something to fix it, so much the better. If you haven't sent in something to fix the mistake that they cite, you no longer need to because they figured it out, but it's just frustrating when you get those.
Yeah. And the last one I wanted to cover, because it's sort of a teaser for next week's episode on whether or not you should consider an appeal all the way up to the CAVC, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. But that's the consent to release information to the Office of General Counsel.
Sure. Start out by keeping in mind that whatever you file with the VA is confidential. There's a federal law that says they can't just run around handing out your information willy-nilly to anybody they want. You would think that would not apply when it's part of the claim process itself, but if you appeal from the VA up to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, Congress has decided that that means you're now leaving the VA as an administrative body and going to the court. So you're going outside this closed confidential system. And in order to do that, what the process is that the VA will send you a form, a consent form, and your job is to fill out the form. Basically, it just requires the date and your signature, acknowledging that it's okay with you for the VA to take your records that they've got, your claims file, and turn that over to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims so that they can review your case because you've decided to appeal to the court.
All right. And that's all the time we have for today, but please be sure to subscribe and tune in next week when we go over all the ins and outs of the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims.
We hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.